Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Elliott from Dirk.com, and in this tutorial, which is sponsored by the fine folks at Squarespace, we will be making this image, but not before we make this image. This tutorial is sort of split into two sections, the first of which will be a slightly more beginner-friendly race to a basic model with some basic materials. Then in the second half, we'll take things up a notch to add some more advanced materials, like this glitter in the lipstick, some embossed graphics on the base, a smoky glass material, and a nice little metal logo detail for you connoisseurs of fine cosmetics packaging. Stick around until the end, don't miss anything, and let's get started. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with modeling that sort of basic lipstick tube. So you may already have a cube in the middle of your scene. If you don't, you can press Shift A and add in a cube. And then I'm just going to press G and then holding Control, move that up on the Z axis, and you can press Z so that doesn't slide around. Just so that that's sitting kind of on our ground plane there. And then what I'll do is press Tab to go into edit mode. We'll be doing that a lot, going in and out of edit mode, and the hotkey for that is Tab. And then to make this a little bit more of a tall shape, I'm going to press S and Shift Z to scale on the X and Y axis, so that pressing Shift excludes the Z axis. Just till we have a shape, maybe something a little bit like that. And that's looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is cut a hole in the middle of this section here. And there's a pretty easy way to do that. The first thing we'll do is I'm going to add in a couple edge loops. And the hotkey for that is going to be Control and R. So if you press Control R and then click, that'll allow you to drag it around. But if you just right click, it'll leave it right in the center. So let's do that again on this side. And then right click to complete that command. And then I want to select this middle vertex. And if you're in like face select mode or edge select mode, you can press 1 on the top of your keyboard to enter vertex select. Those options are also up here in the top left of your screen. So I'm going to press X and delete that vertex in the middle. And then I want to select all these ones around the outside. I can just press Alt and then left click on kind of an edge, and that will select the whole edge loop. So then I'm going to extrude inwards. So I'll press E and then right click to kind of close out that command. We still have those vertexes there though, vertices. And then I'll press S to scale them in and just scale them in a little bit. And then I'm going to use a hotkey to kind of take this shape here that's a square and convert it to a circle. And the hotkey is Shift Alt S. And that will start the two sphere command. And then if you just drag, you can see that will kind of go to a circular shape. So just drag that all the way over until it is a circle. And if you don't want to remember that hotkey, Shift Alt S, there's a way you can access it via the menu here. If you go into Mesh, Transform, and then to Sphere, you can see the hotkey again there, Shift Alt S. So with that there, we're not really going to see inside this portion of the lipstick tube, but I'm going to press E and Z just to extrude down so that we can have a little bit of control over this lip here. Now, obviously, this is looking very polygonal, not very round. So the way I will make that more round is by adding in a subdivision surface modifier. And we can add in a couple levels of that, maybe about 3. But when we do that, obviously, you can see that it's kind of rounding out the whole shape, and we really only wanted to round out that circle in the middle. So one way to handle edge control with a subdivision surface is just to add in edge loops like this. But there's a way I like to do it often that is a little bit easier to work with, a little bit more procedural. So I'm going to press Control Z to undo those. And I'll instead add a bevel node, a bevel modifier. So if we disable the subdivision, you can see that the bevel is basically, if you're familiar with the term bevel, this makes sense to you, but it's basically adding in those edge loops for us. And we can add in more to have a little bit finer edge control. But when we turn the subdivision surface back on, you can see that's not really doing much. And that's because these modifiers work in order. So we need to drag the bevel before the subdivision. And now you can see that that's working properly. Now we do have one problem, which is that it's also beveling these edges. So it's kind of reintroducing our problem just on a beveled mesh. But the reason that that's happening is because there's a limit method here. So Blender is basically being told that any angles less than 30 or sharper than 30 or greater, I don't know. But this angle method will basically tell Blender like which angles to bevel and which not to. So we obviously want to bevel these ones on the corners, and those are 90. So we can basically just turn this all the way up until it's just a little bit less than 90. So something like 70 is going to work just fine there. So let's say maybe you have your own cosmetics brand and things are going well for you selling on social media, but it's time to take things to the next level. Take your beauty brand to that next level with Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 place to go get a beautiful website up and running in almost no time. They've got tons of easy to use and lovingly designed templates that anyone can use, even if you've got no experience ever setting up a website before. Once you've got your site looking how you like, connect social media platforms, and even set up an online shop to sell directly on Squarespace. When you're ready to get started, head on over to squarespace.com/Dirk for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing I think that I will do is go ahead and add in that part that you would kind of hold on to, sort of the sheath that goes around the lipstick, if you will. My wife did help me out on this tutorial, but I did not get the term for that particular phrase. But while I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and right click and shade this smooth because I can see that that was still not smooth. So this is looking good. Now I don't want to add that part just right down here at the bottom where my cursor is. So I'm going to go back in edit mode on this object. And then remember Alt and left click to select this ring here. And then I'll use a command called Shift S, which will allow me to snap my cursor to a new location. And I'll snap my cursor to selected. So now my cursor is sitting right there in the middle of that circle where I can go ahead and press Shift A and add in a circle. This circle, when you start it off, will have a default vertices value of 32. We are going to be adding some subdivision surface to this to make it smoother. So I don't quite need a full 32, but maybe I'll just do 24. So we can see that this isn't really a perfect circle, but when we add in the subdivision surface, that's going to look just fine. So tabbing into edit mode on this, I'm going to just scale that down till it's about the size of our hole there. And then I'll press E and Z to just come up to a height that we like. And let's just move this down a little bit. So again, the first thing I wanted to do was add in a subdivision surface. And the reason I do that, you might be thinking, well, why don't I just start it off with more vertices? But the subdivision surface just gives us more fine control. So for example, in the viewport, we only have one level of subdivision, but when we render it, we'll have 2. So I usually like to keep these the same, but if your viewport is performing a little bit slow, then you can leave the viewport levels lower. That's looking nice and smooth. We can right click and shade it smooth. And then I want to give this some thickness, and I'm going to do that with a solidify modifier. Now the solidify will do about what it sounds like. It will give it some thickness. It will solidify it. But with this shaded smooth, we can see we have a little bit of an error here where Blender is trying to make this curve smooth, but really we want that to be sharp. Now one way you can handle that is down here in the normals option on this green circle tab. You can turn on auto smooth, which is going to have some control that's similar to what we had with the bevel modifier, but we might just want to actually leave this smooth. And so that we get a nice little highlight there, I'm thinking I'm going to make that like a metal material. We might want to just round that edge over a little bit. So I'm going to add in a bevel modifier, and that's okay if that's at the bottom of the stack, and then just add in a few segments here. If you had bevel problems on this object or this object, the bevel modifier by default will come with a clamping option on. So you can see if we uncheck this, that's going to, basically the clamp will help you from going through your mesh. So if you had problems ever with the bevel modifier, try turning off this clamp overlap. You can kind of see where the problems might have been. Sometimes if you have doubles, vertices on top of each other, that will cause issues. But usually I leave this clamp on. And basically what was happening here is that with these edges so close to each other, it's not going to let you go too big of a bevel. So we'll just kind of turn that down. You can see eventually it will just stop because it's hitting the clamp. Just a value like that I think is going to look pretty good. And about 4 segments is fine. If we wanted to scale this whole thing out a little bit just so it kind of pressed up to that edge a little bit more, we could do the same command we did at the very beginning of the tutorial. S and Shift Z will maintain our height, but allow us to make this a little bit bigger. So that's looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is go ahead and add in the actual lipstick. So let's add in a mesh circle, and 24 is fine here as well. Let's scale this down just till it's right inside our tube there. And then I'm going to press E and Z, go up. And this is one thing I definitely struggled with a lot. I was looking at references on Sephora, but I'm not really quite sure exactly how tall this should be. But something like that is going to look good. And then I'll press F to make that a face. And then while I'm in here, I'll go ahead and add in a subdivision surface because we're going to want that smoother. And you can see the other reason I did that was to introduce this problem. So again, in this case, maybe we will use edge loops. And then at the top here, we kind of want to edge loop on the inside, and I can use an inset command. So the hotkey for that is I. I'll press I to inset that. And then we have kind of our flat topped lipstick. Now we do want to add a little bit of an angle to that. There's a number of ways you can do it, but one way that I think works pretty well is to select sort of this whole area here. And the way I'm going to do that is just with this one face in the middle selected, I'll press Control and plus on my number pad, and that will grow my selection. And then what I can do is a fun little command down here. I'm sure there's a hotkey for it. Yeah, Shift, Control, Alt, S. See that? Once it gets to 4 keys, that's a little bit too much for me. But on this left sidebar here, which if you don't see that, you can press T. You can click on this shear command, and that's going to give us a really easy way. If we just grab this handle here, that'll allow us to kind of tilt it a little bit. Now, lipstick comes in a ton of different shapes here at the top. So I'll leave it to you to decide exactly kind of what shape you want. I just want to, I think that looks pretty good. I might give it a little bit more roundness though I'm just going to add in an edge loop here to kind of control this a little bit, because what I'll do now is I'm just going to scale in sort of, maybe just these two, scale that in. Maybe I want more, and you can just click up here to get rid of that shear command. Scale that in a little bit. Maybe I don't want this one. Scale that in. And then maybe kind of in my side view, just kind of pull that up a little bit. Again, lots of different shapes here. But I think something like that is looking pretty good. If you want that to be a little sharper, you could add in a little ring there. But yeah, I think that for me, that's going to be okay. But feel free to mess with this as much or as little as you want. Yeah, it's really It's really hard to get the shape exactly right. I'm just kind of manually moving some things around here. But I think that looks pretty good. You know what? I don't love it. Let's do that again. Okay, so just repeating a few of the same actions there. I'm gonna do my shear again. Looks like I'm going down at a different angle this time. Okay, so got that part. And then maybe let's just scale this in a little bit like that. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. I think that one thing though is that it shouldn't curve so much towards the top. Okay, I'm probably right about back where I was, but this looks a little bit better to me though. So play with that as much as you like, but I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that looks pretty good. So to make the top portion of our lipstick tube, or lipstick rectangular prism in this case, I'm gonna press Shift D to just duplicate this bottom. R, and then holding Control will allow me to snap at a specific angle. So I'll just go till that's at 180, and then just bring that up so it's kind of sitting right on top of the cube there. And then I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode, and then I can press Alt and Z to go into an X-ray to make sure I can see sort of through my object. And I'm just going to bring this up. And then on the inside here, again, Alt and left clicking just to select that whole ring. I'm going to bring this up and then press F to make that face at the top. So we just have sort of a little bit of a thickness in there, room for our lipstick. So that's about it for the modeling. Go ahead and save your file if you haven't done that, so that you don't lose what you got. And then you don't have to, but always a good idea to name your parts. So with this one selected, I'm going to press F2 and name that top. And then I'm going to press F2 and name that base. And then Alt Z to see through this. I'm going to name that lipstick. And then what do we got here? I'm going to call that sheath. I don't actually know what that's called, but we're going to call it sheath. So this is looking solid, but as you might have guessed, we only have a 3D model. We can't really render this right now. So we need to add in some lighting first of all, and then of course some materials. So let's go ahead and start that portion of this tutorial. So when I'm doing materials and lighting, I do usually like to start with at least a little bit of a simple lighting setup so I can see my materials. So let's go ahead and get started with that. But the first thing I'll do is press Shift C to snap my cursor back to the middle of my scene, which is going to be my floor, where I will press Shift A and add a plane. And then in edit mode, I'll just scale that up so that we have, a little bit of a floor. And I usually like to be looking sort of this direction. So I press 7 to see like, okay, I want the camera to be facing that direction. So I'm going to scale this out a little bit so we kind of have a tabletop, if you will. Now, I want to get my viewport working a little bit better so that I can start to have multiple windows here, not just one big one that's for the modeling portion. But I'm going to click in this top corner here and just drag this over. And then I'll click right here and drag this down. Now I'm going to have this be a shader editor where I can work with materials. And then one of these other views I'll have as a rendered view. Now usually I like to have it be this one, but we might render this more of a vertical format. So I'm going to press N and T to hide these toolbars, and then you might have to scroll depending on how big your screen is, but I'm going to scroll over here and enter rendered view. Now you may by default be rendering in Eevee, but I like to use cycles, especially for still renderings, and we might be doing some glass materials and things that look quite a bit better in cycles. So if you can, work in cycles, but a lot of these are going to work the same in Eevee. So our default world here is just sort of this plain gray environment. So if we look in the world tab, it's just a gray color with a strength of 1. I really want to add in my own lighting though, so I'm going to turn that down to 0, and we can also disable the overlays in this rendered view. So now we just have, yeah, you can't see anything. So let's go ahead and add some lights. So in my viewport over here, I'm going to press Shift A and add a light, and we'll just make that an area light, and I'll bring that up a little bit, and then drag this out so it's just a little bit bigger. And sometimes I just kind of move it back just a little bit. So again, this is going to be sort of the front of our object. And now it might be a good time to go ahead and actually add in a camera. But before we do that, let's bring up the power on this light a little bit, or a lot of it. And by the way, this may seem like a huge value. We are not working to a real world scale here. You can see that this is taller than like a person. So it's a huge tube, but again, we're just going for a render here. If you want to work in a real world scale, you definitely can, but the principles will be the same. There's just some settings over in the units tab you'd want to be working with. But this looks pretty good. I'll add in, I'm going to press Shift D to add another lamp in. And then sometimes I like to put that one like a little bit to the back, and then maybe another light over here. And we'll have that one kind of a little bit in front of it. So this is not really a 3-point lighting setup, but there are 3 lights. So this just gives us a pretty basic kind of overview of our object and enough to sort of see what's going on. I'm going to add in a camera. And then I'm just going to kind of move it over here. And then in my tab over here, I want to have this be lined up on the x-axis. So I'm going to hold Control and just make that 0. Z at 0 will have us looking straight ahead. X at 90 will have us looking straight ahead. We'll make sure that Y is 0 so we're not kind of crooked there. And then, yeah, that should be pretty good. Let's go ahead and press 0. So I'm going to move my mouse over into this viewport area, press 0, and then I'll be looking through the camera. So I can kind of make some adjustments here. And I think that we will render this maybe kind of like a vertical format, like it would be for an Instagram story or something like that. So let's do 1080 by 1920 for our resolution. And then we can kind of move the camera in a little bit so that that's just nicely framed. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's get started with some of the materials here. So none of these have materials on them now, so I will just select kind of whatever object, but I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to press New, and we'll name that Glass Top. And as you might have guessed, we might want it to be sort of a glass material. Also a good idea to save. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Rec 2, the second portion of this recording. So with the glass top, I want to make it transmissive, so I will turn the transmission value up to 1, which will give us sort of a glassy material. And then for the color itself, you can pick whatever you want. Maybe you want sort of a orangish color or something like that. Now with glass materials, the saturation goes a long way, so you might want to bring it back a little bit if you don't want it to be such a strong color. But you do usually want that value to be up pretty high so that you can see through it nicely. Now, of course, it is looking very foggy right now, and the reason for that is that we have this roughness value up a little higher than we might like. But again, do what you want. We're really getting some stylistic preferences here. A roughness value of 0 would make that super shiny, and a value above that would give it just a little bit of sort of faded look, or a rough look, really. Now, you don't really need to mess with it, but if you are going for a super clear material, this index of refraction is going to control kind of how that looks. Now it might be kind of warping your image in there a little bit. Now I think 1.45 is set up by default for either like glass or water or something. But if you pull this down closer to 1, you're going to get a more like 1-to-1 view of what's inside there. You wouldn't want to make it exactly 1 because then that's not really, the light is basically just going straight through it. So I think the default value looks pretty good there. And I'll bring my roughness back up a little bit. Just wanted to make a little bit of a note on that particular thing. Now, let's you could either hide this like this and just click this little eyeball up here, or what I'm going to do is just I'm going to press G and then Y and just hold Control to kind of move it out of the way a little bit. Now I'm holding Control so that when I want to move it back, I can just snap it right to that same area. So holding control moves things at increments, so easier to move it back to the same place. But if you get it a little bit off, you can always just eyeball it back in place. Now for this material here, I think I'll make this sort of a metallic material. So I'm going to name that metal, and then we'll give that a sort of a gold tone. And in this case, we're going to obviously want to turn this metallic up to 1. And same thing as before, roughness, if you want it to be super shiny, bring that a little bit down. If you want it to be less rough, or more rough, less shiny, bring the value up. But something like a 0.2, I think is going to look fine for me. And then maybe we also use this metallic material on the base. So that's looking nice. And I want to make a note now. I'm going to try to make a note in the intro, but we're just going to kind of blast through some of the materials and lighting so we can get to a basic render. And then what we're going to do is sort of come back to some of these materials and some of the lighting to improve the quality of our render. So we're going to leave things pretty basic for now, but we're going to start adding some more details like logos, and of course making the lipstick a little bit more advanced in another portion of the tutorial, which we'll get to in just a minute. So we will actually add some material to this lipstick, so we're not left with the white lipstick. I'm not sure what character in the world has white lips. Somebody from X-Men, maybe? I don't know. But I'm going to select just kind of a basic color here, maybe like a dirty red, orange. Yeah, something like that looks totally fine. And the default value of 0.5 looks totally fine. But once again, if you want it to be shinier, you can bring that down. If you want it to be rougher, you can bring it up. Maybe I'll leave it at like a 0.4 or something like that. And is this shaded smooth? It looks like it is. Yes, it is. Okay, cool. So that is great for a basic lipstick material. So I'll just leave it at that for now and move that back over top. Now let's check out through our camera view. And yeah, really we're moving along quite nicely. Let's go ahead and add in maybe a material to this floor plane. You could do black, you could do white, kind of whatever vibe you're going for. Maybe for now, let's just make that let's just make it black. And of course, roughness, once again, you could bring that down if you want to see the reflection there. And yeah, this is just super moody render. But yeah, looking pretty solid. So if you did want to maybe rotate your lipstick tube, rather than having to select all these parts at once, you could add in an empty. And let's make sure our cursor is centered. So I'm going to press Shift-C, Shift-A, empty, and we'll make that just a cube. You can do whatever shape you want. I'm just going to kind of move that up to the middle of my object. And then pressing Alt-Z, I'm going to just select sort of all our lipstick objects. And then with this empty selected last, make sure it has that lighter orange color. I'm going to press Control-P and parent that to that object. So now we have this object, which is basically controlling our empty. And if you look over here in the outliner, you can see that these are now all kind of underneath that empty. So we can call that lipstick control if you want. And on the sake of management, maybe we'll move these objects into their own collection just so we can keep things organized. And I like to call that a new collection called LCA, which I have standing for Lights, Camera, Action. Because, we got our lights, we got our camera, and there's not much action in here yet, but it just seems to make sense to add the A at the end there. So that's looking good. And the purpose of doing that, of course, was now we can just select the empty object and everything's going to kind of move around with it. So the way our lighting is set up now is working pretty good for us. But if you needed to, you could kind of go in and adjust, maybe add some more lights. You really don't want to use too many lights in your scene because you want to kind of have some nice contrast, some darker areas, some brighter areas. But yeah, that's looking pretty good. If you wanted to, you could kind of take this off and render it however you like. Maybe we do that, maybe we don't do that. But anyways, on the topic of render settings, of course, here we've got our resolution, and then in this little back of the camera, it looks like an oven, but I think it's supposed to be the back of a camera. We have our other rendering settings. Now yours by default may be set to like 4096 for render, which I think is quite a bit high, especially if you're using denoising. Also, if you have a GPU in your computer, make sure that is selected. If you're not seeing it, you can turn it on in your system preferences. That'll be up there, which people always ask. I have two 2080 Ti's in this computer, but I'm getting a new one soon with a 4090, so things are going to be rendering blazing fast. But yeah, render settings, just, something like a 600 is honestly probably overkill. You probably don't even need to go that high, especially if you have denoising on. And then to actually render this image, you'll just press render and then render image, or the hotkey is F12, and that will render your image. So there we have our very basic materials, very basic lipstick tube. And yeah, I'm kind of liking the way it looks. But what I want to do now, for those of you who have been struggling very hard through this first section, feel free to render that, get it up on your website, get it up on your social media, call it a day, pat yourself on the back, congratulations, that's great. But I want to use the rest of this tutorial to go in and just add some more details, mostly with the materials. We're going to do a little bit more of an advanced lipstick material, and then maybe some more details on this class object, and add some logos and things like the bottom. So if you're feeling good, or you're up for a challenge, or maybe you're more of an intermediate user, stick around. We're going to start doing those things next. But if not, then, congratulations. Your lipstick render looks fantastic. Feel free to tag me on Instagram, of course, like and subscribe, things like that. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next portion of this tutorial where we get just a little bit more advanced. Okay, part 2, people. Let's go ahead and start getting a little bit more into these materials, making them look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more exciting. And we'll do just a tad bit more modeling. And maybe we do that first, since we were just working with the materials. Maybe we just add in a little detail. And the detail I want to add is just a little metallic text here on the tube, just so that we have, a little bit of an elevated look here, a little bit of cooler branding. So I'm going to press Alt-R with that empty selected, and I want to add in some text. So I'm going to press Shift-A, add in some text, and then the first thing I like to do is go over here and select whatever font you want. It kind of rhymes. Doesn't really matter where you pick here, just go into the regular, and then it should by default take you to your fonts folder. I like to use a font called Roboto. I think I'll use Roboto Bold Italic. And that gives us some text there. Now I want the text to be centered up. So in this alignment section under the paragraph tab, I'm just gonna have that centered. And then of course, I'll probably type Dirk, because this is, I'm not gonna explain that, but type whatever you want. You can just use a single letter. You can use multiple letters. And I'll make this the gold material, the metal material, and bring this up a little bit, and then just kind of place it on the front of our object. Now we obviously want to give this a little bit of thickness, and you could do that right here in the font settings in the geometry. You can add some extrude to it, but we just start getting like the text mesh that's created just is usually pretty nasty. So there's a couple tricks we'll do to sort of make this look like a kind of a small scale, delicately crafted metal object, if you will. So what I'll first do is I'm going to right click and convert this to a mesh. Right now, if we press tab, then we're still in kind of like typing mode. But if we right click and convert it to a mesh, then when we tab into edit mode, we will have a mesh there. So first thing I'm going to do is give it some thickness, which is very similar to what we could have done right in the font, but we'll solidify this. You have it go out the other way. So that's looking good. Now, of course, I am going to make this smaller, so we'll just do that. And then I want to, which we should probably apply our scale. That's usually a good thing, especially when you're working with modifiers. I want to smooth this out. So a bevel modifier typically does not work well with text. You can see that because of the clamping, and I'll illustrate that issue again here. If we uncheck the clamp overlap, you can see that it just, even at a really small size, we start getting some crazy errors. So bevel modifier really doesn't work well here. So I will, I'll go ahead and add that solidify. And then what I want to do is remesh it. Now, remeshing it, you could use the voxel remesh, which works pretty good. But I actually find that in this case, using the just the older smooth method, and make sure you uncheck remove disconnected if you have multiple letters. You can just turn this up to a certain value, something like a 7 or maybe even a 6 is working okay for me there. Just kind of depend on what you're going for. And then you can do smooth shading. So that's getting us a little bit closer to what we want. Now, the next thing I'll do is maybe actually add a smooth modifier, and we can have that repeat a couple times and turn the value on that up a little bit. Now you have to be careful not to go too far because then it does that spiky thing. But that looks good. something like that. And you can see basically what we're going for here is we just want this to look like it's got some roundedness to it. And then you could even remesh this again. I'm kind of going back and forth trying to sort of remove some of these artifacts that are created and just introduce sort of a nice rounded shape here. So again, I mentioned this isn't necessarily complicated, but it's kind of like, it's a little bit overkill what we're doing here, but just wanted to include it in case you're interested in adding like a little bit of a logo, maybe something you're importing as a vector object or something like that. Just, being able to smooth that out is a good thing to be able to do. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think that looks pretty good. Make sure you have smooth shading checked if you're using the remeshes. And yeah, this just looks like I guess these would actually be made with some sort of either injection molding process or maybe it's cut with hard edges and then they like sandblast it or something. Not totally positive, but yeah, that's looking good. We still have our font kind of holding up well there, but just looks a little bit rounder and a little bit more realistic for sort of the scale we would be imagining this at. Now I'm probably just going to go ahead and apply these modifiers so that, if we end up moving this around, it's not recalculating things too much. But that looks pretty good. I'll apply my scale there and then put that wherever you like. I think I don't know if I like it like down here, or I think I do kind of like it just like in the middle right here. So I'm going to use that. And then I'll parent that to the glass top object. So that is looking solid. Now, just so that this scene is a little bit brighter while we're working in it, I think I'm going to leave my original lights in here, but I want to add in an HDRI. So if you haven't worked with HDRIs, that's basically just like a world around your scene that just gives a little bit more interesting reflections, especially when you're working with metal. So in this color option here, I'm going to select an environment texture, and then you'll just need to navigate to wherever you have an HDRI saved. So this is something you'll need to download, but there's many freely available, especially on the Polyhaven website. I've got a lot downloaded here already, but of course, pick one you like. You can go for like a beach scene, or I actually have this pool one, pool 4K.hdri or .hdr. And you're not going to see it if you still have your world strength set at 0. So I'm going to pull that up to 1. And yeah, now for the metal in particular, this is just looking a little bit nicer. And just while I'm working in this scene, it's going to be a little easier to see things. So that's in good shape. First thing I think I'll do, I always say first thing like so much, but what are we on now? Like the 150th thing? Anyways, for the glass top material, I want to give this sort of a nice faded look where it kind of changes color from the top to the bottom. And if you watch my caustics tutorial, we're going to do a similar thing we did there. So that hotkey I just pressed was with this principled shader selected, press Control T, and then I'll add in these nodes. If that didn't work for you, you might need to enable the Node Wrangler add-on, which comes by default with Blender. You don't need to buy it, don't need to download it. It's right there. Just enable it. A lot of handy hotkeys there. Another one, which will be Shift S to switch this image texture to a gradient texture. And then another one, Shift Control click to preview this texture. I want to have this going from top to bottom. So I'll just use the generated input here. And you can see that that's kind of going from right to left, but I want to have it go the other way around. So I'm just going to rotate that. Looks like the Y is the correct orientation. So now it's going from black at the top to white at the bottom. So you can see that now we have that kind of smoky look at the top, and it's going to a full clear at the bottom. But I do want to reintroduce some of that color. So I'm going to add in a color ramp and just drop that right there. And so now this is the black and this is the white, obviously. But maybe I'll leave that at a black, but then I'll bring this back to my color I had before, which you can just select that, Control C, copy that color, Control V, paste it. And now we have kind of our other color back. And maybe up here we want sort of the same color, but we'll just maybe make it more saturated and maybe maybe darker. Kind of this smoky, beautiful lipstick look. Anyways, I think that looks solid. Okay, next thing we might want to do is, what should we do? Should we do the lipstick next, or should we do the logos on the base next? I think we'll do the logos on the base next. Let's just do the lipstick. Yeah, let's do the logos. Okay. It's like I'm listening for someone to tell me something, but I'm sitting all by myself in my office right now, and I can't hear anybody. So I want to add some logos to this base. So press Control T on this metal material. And you know, before I do that, I'm actually going to name this, I don't want it to be applied up here. So I'm going to select just this one, do new, and then do metal logos. So that this has the metal logos and this has the metal. Okay. So Control T to add in some of those texture nodes again with the Node Wrangler add-on. And then I'm going to open up a black and white logo file, which I have somewhere around here in my Dirk folder. I use this often in tutorials. I call it a sticker sheet. So it's just a black and white image because a lot of these values in the principal shader work from 0 to 1. So black is 0, white is 1, and this just allows me to really easily control things happening with material. So you might already have a logo. If you do, you know, or just anything, especially if it's black and white, it's super easy to work with. But I'm going to double click that, bring in my sticker sheet. And by default, this has UV projection, which we are going to want to use UV projection, but it's, you can see it's stretched. This is just kind of legacy UVs, if you will, from when we started off with that cube. So this does have UVs, but they're not really what we want. So I think what I'll do is, let's actually open up another little window here. And let's make this one a UV editor. And then in this object, I'm going to press, first of all, I'm going to save my file because sometimes this gets a little bit choppy when you change this to texture. It didn't crash. Okay, sometimes it crashes when I change to texture right there. That just might be the version I'm working with, which I never mentioned it, but I'm in 3.4.1. So if you're working on this tutorial sometime in the future, things might look a little bit different. But now I can see my texture on there. So I'm going to tab into this object, and then I'm just going to press A to select everything, and then U, Smart UV Project, and then I'm just going to move this all into a white area on my texture. So something like that. And then I want to, let's see here. So this is the front. Maybe right here gets a little bit of a Dirk thing. So these should, when you do Smart UV Project, it should give you the right scale, the right aspect ratio. So you can see we don't have anything stretched anymore. So I'm just going to put that maybe right there. Dirk logo on the front. Maybe on this side, I'll just grab those. Maybe we'll do a Dirk.com on the side. Something like that. Looking mighty nice. And I think that's good enough. Well, I guess you might as well do it over here too, right? So I'm just getting the textures in the place I want right now, but actually have that start working with the material. So right now we just have this plugged into the color input. But I actually don't really want it to affect the color. I just want it to look still like metal. So I'm going to disconnect that. And then I want to have this instead affecting, let's start off by making it, give it a little bit of an emboss. So I'm going to take this color, plug it into the normal. And then for that to work properly, I'm going to Shift A, add in a vector bump, and then pop that right there. And then instead of going to the normal, I have this go into the height. So now you can see we have this really nice sort of embossed look. Now, depending on the resolution of your image, you might get some artifacts there. Mine's just kind of a crappy JPEG image. So I'm going to turn down that strength a little bit. Also, you usually, I think, want this distance value to be pretty small. And then you can still use the strength there to control it. Now, if you are getting those artifacts, then yeah, using the strength will kind of help remove some of those. You can see it looks a little bit better now. It also depends on how far you're going to be zoomed out. So you might want to bump the strength up if you're going to be super far out. But if you're up close, you should be a little bit more delicate with it. Now you could, of course, use some like blurring on your image to give that a little bit more roundedness, whatever you like. But I think that that's looking pretty good. This invert option on the bump node will allow you to make it bump out or bump in. I think I'll have it stay in. Now, the other thing I want to use this texture to affect is the roughness. So let's say we want part of our, we want where the logo is to be shiny, and we want the rest to be more of a matte finish. So we had 0.2 here. If we just plug this into the roughness, you can see now, again, I mentioned 0 black is a value of 0. So that's 0 roughness. So you can see now that that's extremely shiny. And 1, which we have white in our texture, is going to be very rough. Remember, a roughness value of 1 is super rough. So we don't want this to be perfectly shiny. We don't want this to be perfectly rough. So I'm going to use a node converter called a map range. Drop that right there. And then, so we're basically taking values from 0 to 1 and converting them to values from 0 to 1. So nothing's happening here, but we want to convert those. We want to map the range of those values. So the minimum value, 0, is the really shiny part. We don't want that to be totally shiny, so maybe we make that like a 0.1. And then obviously we don't want this to be super rough. So let's bring this max value down to like a 0.2. So just a very slight difference where we kind of have the logo popping out a little bit. Now, if we look in our rendered view, that's looking halfway decent. Maybe we need to spin this whole thing around a little bit more. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Should I just move this back over? You could, if you're kind of going back and forth a lot and you're not actually doing an animation, which I do want to do an animation part of this tutorial, but you can just like insert a keyframe. Like let's insert a keyframe on frame 20 and then on frame 21, let's insert a keyframe. Now I can just toggle between these keyframes to kind of move that on and off, which is a little bit convenient. So not really an animation tutorial quite yet, but yeah. So the lipstick, it looks fine now. I'm telling you, it looks fine, especially if you're gonna be zoomed out. That's totally cool. But I want to add in, I think I'm gonna add in a little bit of glitter to it. And then I will also add a little bit of bump to it. Now lipstick, obviously there are like thousands of options and variations, but yeah, I'm gonna make a glittery one with a little bit of roughness to it. So the glitter portion, I'm gonna press Ctrl T to add in my nodes there again. Shift S, I'm gonna switch this one to a Voronoi texture. And then if we Shift Control left click on that, it's not working because we wanna plug this into the object. So yeah, we kind of have this chunky glitter. Yeah, looks like glitter to me. So you're probably gonna wanna scale it up quite a bit. Now we don't want all these crazy colors. We want the glitter portion to be like a white color so that it's shiny. And then we want the rest of the lipstick obviously to be red. So let's disconnect this. Let's Control C to copy our red color since I like that. And then plug this back into the base color and then add in a converter color ramp. And then let's add back in our, maybe we add it on this end. I don't think it really matters. And then let's just bring this up until we have mostly red. So we have just a little bit of glitter in there. Maybe that's too much. Something like that I think will look good. Again, we're in super duper personal preference mode, but let's bring this up pretty high. And this would really only be visible if you're getting in pretty close with your render, but let's say we want it about like that. Now we also need to affect the metallicness. So we're gonna say that the lipstick itself is not metal and the glitter is metallic. So we basically want to use this same setup here. So let's plug this in. But now this, of course, is not going from 0 to 1. It's going from red to 1, which doesn't really make sense. So maybe we just make this black again. And then we can have this. So this is sort of our main glitter control. And then we need to affect the color. So the black and white looks great, works great for the metallic, I think. Let's add in instead of adding the colors right onto here, we're having the color ramp basically control what's glitter, what's not. So let's add in a color, mix color, and put that into the base color there. And then, so one of these, so 0 was our red. So if we plug this into the factor, the first color, the way this works is that, 0 black on the factor is the first color, white 1 is the second. So we want that to be the red, and then we'll have this be just sort of a bright white. Okay, so now we kind of are back to where we were with the color right in the color ramp, but now we can use this to affect the metallic value as well. So we should have now, white is the glitter, so that's a value of 1, black is 0. Okay, so that should be working properly. Now let's add in some roughness variation. So we can use our map range again here. Let's plug that into the roughness. And now it's flip-flopped. So we can add in a converter map range. You could also add an invert, but again, I don't want 0 to 1. So I'm just going to use the map range. So 0 to 1, first let's flip it. So 1 to 0. So now the glitter should be 0 and the lipstick should be 1. So what value did we have before? We had a 0.4. So this should be a 0.4, which is our main lipstick, and then we can leave the glitter as pretty shiny. So yeah, now we have these little, and if we bring the scale back on this, you can see a little bit easier that now we should have, basically metallic flake in our lipstick. But we do want this to be pretty tiny. And now we just have this one really easy control to affect how much glitter is in the lipstick. So go as crazy as you want. If you want it to be a really glittery lipstick, I think that looks kind of cool. But yeah, just pick and choose, do what you want. Maybe you bring this in a little bit so that we don't have quite so much fading with the glitter. Anyways, I'll let you tweak around there. I think we'll leave this portion at that for now. Now, just for a little bit of bumpiness on the lipstick, I'm going to add in another texture here. So for that texture, let's add in a noise texture, and let's plug that into the normal. And then let's add in a vector bump like we did before. Plug that into the height, and we can just pull our object input from way downtown over to there. And now it should be mapping properly. So that's giving us a little bit of bumpiness, obviously, but way too much. So let's again move that down to maybe just a 0.1. And then the scale is going to need to go way up. And the default values work pretty good here. The only one you might want to change maybe is the distortion. So if I pull this distortion up a little bit, it'll kind of make it sort of swirly. Maybe like the lipstick when it was getting made, it's kind of like starts as a waxy and before it hardens, and it's got a little swirl to it. Now this might end up making it look a little bit rough, so you'll probably want to pull this strength down pretty low so that that's a relatively subtle effect. But yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe we make the whole thing a little bit shinier. So what was our shiny value? It was this one, 3.2. Looking real wet and dewy for our pool environment there. Okay, so I'd say that looks pretty decent for the lipstick. Let's go ahead and cover it back up so we can't see all that hard work we just did, and go into our camera view. Now let's kind of find a nice angle here, and maybe we duplicate this collection. So let's do a duplicate linked so that it has the same settings, and maybe we move this over. Maybe this one's straight ahead, and then maybe this one we put the lipstick on the ground or something like that. And we can just kind of, oh wait, so now we have keyframes here. Let's just clear the keyframes for this one. So these are kind of going to be separate, and maybe we just drop that like that or something. So now we have sort of our whole family shot. That might be something you'd want to do for your own website or social media. Maybe we pull that out, and maybe while we're on the topic of social media, maybe we go back to a square format here for the family shot. Pull that in. And for the floor, maybe let's brighten it up a tad. We never named this material. Let's name it floor. Maybe we go for like a little bit more of a white or a gray. That looks nice. And then behind it, let's just you could do just another plane, or I'll do a plane. And then I'm gonna do RX 90, and then bring that back, bring it up, and then, oops, don't accidentally go into edit mode on everything. That'll completely screw up your computer. It doesn't, but it's very intense. So I'm just adding a little bit of backdrop here. Now, if you really like the HDRI you may have selected, you could just do one thing that I do that's sometimes fun is just make this like I'm gonna call it glass back or glass abac, and just make that like a transparent material with a little bit of roughness. Now we kind of have this nice blurry vignette. Might need to bump our lamp up there a little bit. Now, typically when you're working with glass materials, you want this to have a little bit of thickness. So I'm just going to add in a solidify. And yeah, now we have kind of a nice render with a little bit of our HDRI in view, looking a little bit fancier with the camera. If you want less distortion, you can bring this focal length up a little bit. I'm a simple man, so I usually work in increments of 50. So there we got a little bit less distortion, but looks pretty nice, I think. But yeah, change all these settings, colors, do whatever you want. I think I covered everything I wanted to in terms of the more advanced portion. But yeah, pick a cool HDRI or just drop it in kind of whatever environment you want. I'll leave that up to you. Won't cover that too much in this particular video, but maybe in the next video we do some type of animation or something like that. Oh, another setting here, which I personally like to do, is in the color management, turn the look to very high contrast. And then boom, you got some heavy hitting contrast. That looks nice. Well, that's kind of cool. You start getting a little bit of reflection there. So go ahead and save your file if you haven't. But I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you did, thumbs up, like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, share your results with me. I'm excited to see lipsticks from now until the future, until people stop watching this video, which, sometimes these videos I get, you're sharing stuff from years ago, which I'd love to see. Phone tutorial, obviously still kicking. Check out my other videos if you haven't, but thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Yeah, share your results with me. I really love seeing what you come up with. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. I'll shut the heck up and see you next time. Thanks for watching.